According to Britain's draconian anti-terror laws, the Labour Home Secretary has designated Palestine Action a terrorist organisation, and therefore we can only discuss them in a factual way. This programme does not aim to demonstrate support for the group, as that would be illegal, but rather to understand why the British state deemed it necessary to outlaw the group and as a result criminalise over 3,000 law-abiding citizens who took to the streets in an act of civil disobedience. We're joined this week by Dr Asim Qureshi, who is a human rights lawyer, an author, and the research director at Cage International. The hunger strikers have filtered 24 prisoners.
They targeted Elbit systems.
Greta Thunberg was in the UK and she was arrested.
This is a story of the Balfour Declaration. This is a story of genocide.
Most of these people are white, elderly. Some of them are priests and vicars, and the police have been commanded to arrest them.
The UK government is acting in the interests of the Zionists.
Can you really stop a company from supplying the Israeli state with all of the accomplices of the Western states in between who guarantee those supply lines?
We're talking about the mass killing of human life. You know, both Muslim, Christian, and how being involved in direct action actually, in some ways, is part of the quintessential British character.
Dr Asim Qureshi, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to The Thinking Muslim.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Now, today I want to talk about the prescription of an organisation, a controversial organisation, according to the British government at least, an organisation called Palestine Action, clampdown on protests here in the UK, Palestine protests, pro-Palestine protests. A lot of our viewers have been hearing about the hunger strikers, a filtered 24 prisoners, but also I think almost 2,000 people who have now been arrested, mostly on the streets of London, for showing solidarity towards this particular group, Palestine Action. And all of, I suppose, this has been met with considerable horror, in particular from conscientious communities, Muslim communities, pro-Palestine communities. So, Asim, I really want to understand the details because I think for so many of us, a lot of this is quite hazy. But let's start with what happened today. Greta Thunberg was in the UK and she was arrested for showing solidarity with Palestine Action prisoners. I think she had a placard with that written on it. Can you just talk to this? Like, why was she arrested?
Yeah, Jazakumullah khair. So yeah, this came out to the blue a little bit. I didn't expect Greta, who I was actually with a couple of nights ago. We were outside the US Embassy speaking about the hunger strikers and the Filton 24 and direct action and the need for an escalation in our activities here in the UK. She spoke really well that night. Clearly, I think the longer that she's been here, the more she's been involved in trying to raise awareness about their cases. And it's really wonderful to have somebody with such a large platform. I think she's got like 16 million followers on social media on just one platform. That's quite sizable. Yeah. And for her to come here and to use her voice for these people is really quite incredible. And so today, when we saw the video of her holding a placard which stated, I support Palestine Action prisoners, I oppose genocide, it was surprising to see her being stopped by the police and being arrested.
Why was that surprising?
It's surprising because the law as it stands states that you cannot support Palestine Action because it's been proscribed. For those who don't know what proscription is, it is the legal means by which the government bans an organization as a terrorist organization. Yeah. So under the Terrorism Act, what you cannot do for a proscribed organization is to express support for them in any way. And you can't do that actively and you can't do that recklessly either. So either of those two elements. Yeah. Now, the question is now, after we saw the video of her being arrested, is did she act recklessly in expressing support for Palestine Action? Right. I think most of us with some degree of legal training would argue that we don't consider that an expression of support, either willfully or recklessly, of Palestine Action as an organization.
Because you're supporting prisoners.
Right. Yeah. So what she's saying is that I support those prisoners who are or were part of Palestine Action. Of course, some of whom are currently in prison before Palestine Action was proscribed as an organization, such as the Filton 24. And so literally just down the road from here, I came from trying to support her outside the police station. And hopefully, inshallah, by the time we're done, they'll have seen some common sense and release her.
Right. Okay. So the prescription of Palestine Action, tell me a little bit more about this organization. Of course, we have to, on this podcast, like we have to do in general life, we have to be careful with the law. We're not supporting Palestine Action in this conversation. But tell me a little bit more about the organization and why the government decided to ban it.
Yeah, sure. So Palestine Action starts in 2020, during the COVID year. And the basic premise of it, of Huda Mori and Richard Bernard, was this idea that in the UK, we have a constellation of organizations that support the Zionist state. So remember, this is like 3 years before the genocide even kicks off.
Yeah.
At least the latest round of the genocide, because of course, some of us would claim that a genocide has been constantly ongoing process for 100 years.
Yeah.
But that the most important thing that we can do as activists in the UK is to shut down the supply lines from the UK that continue to support the Zionist entity. And what they did very strategically is, rather than going after every single company that is in that supply line, they targeted one,
Really?
which is Elbit Systems, the largest manufacturer of military-grade weapons for the Zionist occupation forces. So they said, okay, let's look at Elbit Systems. They're the ones who produce all this machinery of violence, and let's find ways of shutting it down. So they started off with Elbit's HQ itself, targeting their main offices in London by spray painting and just causing just some general disturbances and different types of kind of low-level actions. And then as time went on, and especially once the genocide began, they escalated those actions into rooftop occupations of their factories where the weapons were being built and designed, storming their buildings, finding out the consignment orders from different companies, who are the different companies that are supplying the parts that Elbit System needs to produce these violent machines. So there was a whole strategy in place in terms of how to stop the weapons leaving UK shores and going to support the Zionist occupation forces. And I think there are very few organizations that I think have had the same level of material impact that Palestine Action did before its proscription. I think it was quite a remarkable group while it was still active and running.
And what was the impact? Because of course, some uninitiated viewers would probably say, "Oh, it's a lot of noise." And can you really stop a company from supplying the Israeli state with all of the accomplices of the Western states in between who guarantee those supply lines?
Well, I mean, just today, Allianz, the insurance company, announced that they were going to be cutting their contracts with Elbit Systems. That's literally the news today. So direct action is carrying on, even though Palestine Action has ended as an organization. So you've got Elbit Systems itself, but then what you have are the landlords for their factories. You have insurance companies that back them, investment companies that also invest into their system. So Barclays Banks removes millions and millions of dollars of investments from Elbit Systems because Barclays was targeted by direct action. So it's not just Elbit Systems itself. It's about the infrastructure that maintains Elbit Systems. And what they did very effectively is interfere with all of those supply lines, costing Elbit Systems billions of dollars in terms of damage, in terms of loss of finance, in terms of shutting a factory down for a single day. Every single day, because the UK law is this: if you have a factory and you have somebody on the roof of a factory, then employment law does not permit anybody to work on the factory floor while there is someone on the roof. So they understood this and strategically targeted these factories by doing rooftop occupations every single minute, every single hour, every single day that goes by, where there are people not working on that factory floor is money lost. And they were willing to stand up there, to glue themselves to these roofs in order to what? To save Palestinian lives. Because that's what we're talking about ultimately now, right? How do you save Palestinian life?
Yeah.
If you or I, and I give this example when I give talks sometimes, I sit there at the front of the talk and I say, I have a bullet in my hand right now. This bullet will leave my hand tomorrow and go to the Zionist occupation forces and be involved in the killing of a Palestinian man, woman, or child. Say there's 100 people in the room.
Yeah.
Which one of you 100 people would take this bullet out of my hand right now if you had the option to rush the stage and take it from me?
Yeah.
I said, all of you would take it. If you knew for a fact that that bullet would not leave my hand today and will not kill a Palestinian tomorrow.
Yeah.
What is direct action other than that? The fact that some of these actionists went inside the factory itself and smashed up drones and smashed up quadcopters. And for those who don't know what a quadcopter is, and I think we've spoken about it before on a previous podcast, it is a machine that flies around Gaza, emitting the sounds of men, women, and children screaming. So it lures Palestinian adults out into the open so that they can be shot either by a sniper or through machine gun fire that's attached to the drone.
Yeah.
That is what these actionists were destroying when they went inside the factories.
Yeah.
And so what greater, when we think of the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, where he says that if you see an evil, then change it with your hand. Living in the West, living in the UK, where these machines of violence are leaving our shores, is there something that we could think of that is a higher level of changing with the hand than to literally break apart the machines that are doing the killing? I don't think so. In my view, I think that really that action fulfills that level of a command by the Prophet ﷺ.
Every winter, millions of families face the cold without the warmth of a home, a full meal, or proper clothing. For families living through conflict, poverty, or displacement, the winter season can be the most difficult time of the year. In Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and beyond, children sleep under thin blankets, parents skip meals to feed their little ones, and schools struggle to stay open as temperatures drop. But together, we can change that. With Beit Mal's Winter Relief Campaign, your compassion provides families with food to stay nourished, blankets and warm clothing to stay safe, and fuel to bring warmth back into their homes. You help keep children in school, families together, and hope alive through the harshest months. Because when you give warmth, you're not just providing comfort, you're restoring dignity, preserving hope, and saving lives. Together we can make sure no family is left in the cold this winter. Give today and help turn their struggle into safety. Turn your compassion into hope.
Visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to learn more and give.
They were prescribed as a terrorist organization by the current government.
Correct.
Can you talk to that term terrorism? Because of course, I've met people when I was in the United States, and there were some Muslims who believed that they were actually involved in acts of terrorism, right, as we conventionally understand terrorism, right? So can you explain, what is it about their actions that make them a terrorist organization?
Sure. I think that's a really great question. Okay, let's take it back a little bit further though. Terrorism legislation in the UK is predominantly used where there is no violence involved.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to set that as the baseline for how we understand terrorism laws in the UK.
Yeah.
It sounds counterintuitive considering the acts of political violence we've seen in the UK since 7/7 onwards, but this is the reality. Where there is an actual act of violence, an act of political violence, that some people would term terrorism, but I prefer to call political violence, the Offences Against Persons Act is used, or the Fire and Explosives Act. They generally speaking, for the most part, will not use terrorism legislation. Terrorism legislation is used for things like reading the wrong book that is considered to be a terrorist publication, like, I don't know, the Anarchist Cookbook or something along those lines.
Or Milestones or something.
I mean, Milestones technically is not considered a terrorist publication, but I think they would probably like to at some point ban it as such.
Yeah.
Again, we can talk about the details of why that's the case.
Yeah.
And of course, why they would be wrong to do so.
Yeah.
But, For example, my own colleague, Mohammed Rabbani, flying into the UK on his phone from a trip that we were both at the same time, interviewing a brother who'd been tortured by the FBI, stopped by the police who demand access to his phone. He refuses, saying, I have client confidential information on here that could really hurt my client. Them not listening to him. And what is he prosecuted under? Terrorism legislation. What is he charged with? Terrorism legislation. What is he convicted of? A terrorist offense.
Yeah.
But he's not a terrorist. And this is the thing. When we look at terrorism statistics, and they wheel these out every single year, this many people were charged, arrested on terrorism laws, this many people were charged, this many people convicted. We have this idea that these were all acts of violence, but nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
These are all very, very, very low-level offenses that almost have nothing to do with actually being involved in a plot to kill or harm people in any way. So that's, sorry, I just wanted to establish that baseline.
Yeah.
Because when we get to proscribed organizations, then the entirety of the prescription regime is political. It is entirely political. It is about how our government chooses to express its politics in the world. And the prescription regime is a tool of violence itself, because it is involved in the idea that certain organizations, we do not want them to be politically seen as part of a solution to a problem. What we have to understand around any of these prescriptions is that it is always a political decision. And what we saw with Palestine Action, through a number of leaked emails, is that there is a great deal of interference by the Israeli embassy, by the Zionist state itself, in what? In pushing our government to proscribe this organization. And that's the key really here, which is that the UK government is acting in the interests of the Zionists through proscribing Palestine Action. Why? Because it was effective while it wasn't banned. It was a very effective organization, as is BDS, but just at a much larger scale.
So to be clear here, there isn't a single example of Palestine Action members or supporters committing acts of violence against individuals in what we understand to be a conventional act of terrorism.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there's some arguments about right now going on in the trial of the Filton 24 about whether or not they, one or two of them acted violently towards a security guard. But actually, what's been coming out in the trial so far, in the cross-examination of those security guards, of their body cameras, and of the testimony that's been given by the actionists themselves, is that actually the security guards seem to be lying about their narrative. And that seems to be quite consistent, that they exaggerated what took place. And actually the people, from what it seems, from what I've read of the trial so far, that it was the security guards who were actually acting violently towards the actionists.
Yeah. Asim, can I ask you a question about the Sharia in regards to direct action? Because I met an imam recently who was convinced that all of this is haram, like to engage in direct action because you're breaking the law, you're disturbing private property. He mentioned something about citizenship and you're breaking your contract with the state. And so he was pretty clear that, we can't do this. We can protest, we can use our voices, but we can't physically get involved like this, as direct action would require from us. Are you confident from an Islamic perspective that there's enough cover here from a Hukm Shari'i that we, what they're doing is acceptable from Islam?
Jazakallah khair. This is a really, really important and quite a serious question. Obviously, we're talking to ulama of our own. We've been thinking about this in quite a lot of depth. I wrote a paper that we published online about how we could understand both direct action and civil disobedience from an Islamic perspective. Now, we talk about a number of things here. We can talk about the culture of what it means to be British, to be part of this society, and how direct action fits within larger and longer schema of what it means to be a British person, and how being involved in direct action actually in some ways is part of the quintessential British character, one that is
Suffragettes.
celebrated and lauded. Like actually, if we look at, it was interesting because the last time I was in Parliament a few weeks ago or a couple of weeks ago with the families of the Filton 24, the ones who were hunger striking, when we were coming out, there was this monument, a Lego monument to the suffragettes there. And it was so ironic because the very thing that the Palestine Action group are being proscribed for is the very thing that, of course, the suffragettes were being praised for. And of course, the level of violence that the Palestine Action have been willing to use does not come close to the ceiling of what the suffragettes doing. Nobody is throwing themselves in front of horses at racing tracks. No one is firebombing the homes of anyone by throwing effectively what is Molotov cocktails through those letterboxes. Like no one is smashing up the windows of everyday people, right? The suffragettes, I would argue, were far, far, far more violent than Palestine Action have been, who have targeted They've targeted a weapons manufacturer and the constellation of organizations that support it. So we have to get the facts straight up here about what's actually going on before we get into like what does Islam have to say about this. Now, what is taking place is a genocide, right? A UN committee has stated not only is genocide taking place right now as of this moment, but it has been taking place since October 2023. Okay, so that is the legal ground that we're on. Now, if people want to bring the claim that somehow the relationship that we have with our own countries is breached by some people taking direct action, and this is actually a breaking of the Aqd that we have, then the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does the Aqd say about the role that this government and our country and private companies play in relation to the genocide? And of course, the role that our taxes play in terms of maintaining that. Now, especially from a Maqasidi perspective, if we're to look at this.
So Maqasid being
the kind of objectives of the Sharia, right? Then we cannot equate the Aqd of everyday citizenry with what is happening in relation to the genocide, when we are seeing people being massacred en masse, while of course we sit here very, very easily. And in fact, I would argue further, contribute within an economy that, I say is one of the two central pillars of Zionism, the US and the UK. They are the two main pillars that maintain Zionism in this world. And my concern always is that as UK Muslims and US Muslims, that we are closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment than almost any other group of Muslims in the world because of the relationship that our countries have to the Zionists themselves. So if people want to argue that somehow we have broken the trust, or we have broken our relationship with the countries that we live in, or that somehow somebody's private property trumps the stopping of mass killing, then I'm sorry to say that person's probably had a spiritual lobotomy. That's the only way that I could describe it. And that person should really, really rethink their relationship to the Quran, to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It is the Prophet ﷺ who informs us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's view of the Kaaba, right? The most holy sanctuary. If there was a building in the world that you would rank as number one for Muslims in terms of the sanctity of it being a piece of property, then nothing comes higher than the Kaaba. And the Prophet ﷺ is the one who informs the Kaaba of Allah's view of the building. He doesn't say it about himself. He's speaking to it and he says that not you pointing to the Kaaba and not the city that surrounds you is worth the sanctity of a single Muslim. So when the Prophet is informing the Kaaba of Allah's view of how he prioritizes Muslim life over buildings and structures and kind of sites of worship, then where does that leave us in the middle of a genocide, when this country that we live in is not just complicit? Complicity is a word that I hear constantly and consistently. If we're using the word complicit, it means we haven't even bothered doing the work to understand how central the UK is in the maintenance of Zionism as a neo-imperial arm of capitalism and the kind of resource extraction that's happening in the Middle East. We're obsessed with this idea that a Jewish lobby is so powerful that it is controlling the way that the British government and British foreign policy operates. But have you not considered how Zionism is a manifestation of the way that the British continually operate as a neo-imperial empire? Have we not considered how resource extraction that happens in the Middle East, the maintenance of despots in the Middle East, is entirely part of a colonial plan that is still continuing to this day? So why are we blaming a Zionist lobby for something that is a problem that was created by the Brits in the first place and is maintained by them till this day?
Yeah.
And so I get angry, and I'm sorry that I think my frustration is coming out as I speak. But when I hear these types of arguments, I don't find that they have any grounding in actually what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us on this earth.
It's interesting that when I was listening to you there, I got an impression that almost that Imam and yourself, you've got a completely different conception of what it means to be a Muslim even, right? Well,
I would say even what it means to be British, but yeah, fine.
Okay, what it means to be British, what it means to be a Muslim. Just speak to that, please, because I mean, alhamdulillah, I've had the fortune to sit with you and to meet you on a number of occasions, and I feel that like you have got an idea of being a believer that probably is probably quite distinct to the brother I was speaking to, about what he means a good Muslim looks like. And I don't want to sort of go into the good Muslim, bad Muslim type of rhetoric, but there is a difference, right? Just speak to that, please. Like, what is it? What does it mean to be a Muslim in your eyes?
It's such a obviously fundamental question about who we are, what our identity is, what we believe in, how we operate in the world. Everything ultimately has to come back to Tawheed, right? Our worshipping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way that He is described to us in the Quran, in the way that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is described to us as well. To embody that means that worship has to be complete in all of its senses. So when we understand worship, we often relegate it to these spaces of ritualistic spiritual activity, right? And then there's the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But for me, there's no distinction between the two. Like the people of Shu'aib who asked Shu'aib alayhi salam, what is the difference? What has the salah, what has the prayer got to do with the marketplace? It's got everything to do with the marketplace. How can you operate in a world where you do not understand that our transactional behavior, our behavior in social media, our behavior in the political space, our behavior in any place that we're given is part of who we are as Muslims? And so the idea that somehow you can live in an environment which contributes to the harming of other Muslims elsewhere in the world, and that it doesn't have an impact upon you spiritually and doesn't say something about who you are as a Muslim, then I think that is when we get into the problem in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not, He does not help a people until they truly believe. But what is true belief? And people say, oh, it's because we don't pray enough salah, we don't read enough Quran and whatever else. And yeah, that's true. We need to do all of that and much more of it.
Yeah.
But we also need to do all the other things as well, where we don't allow for our fear of the dunya to dictate to us what it means to live an ethical life. And I think, when you speak to a lot of the same people that Imam that you met, and I've heard these arguments myself a number of times. When you get to the bottom of why it is that these take these positions, they always say the same thing. What will happen to us, right? And now we're in a different space though. Now we're making political judgments based on what we think is right or wrong.
Yeah.
But that's not where we should start from. We should always start from the perspective of ethically, What is the right thing to do? Now, you might make a different decision about how you might want to operate, but don't hide behind the idea of halal and haram as a way of masking cupidity. That's a completely different thing. And that is my concern, that some people use these arguments as a way of trying to deal with the dilemma that they have internally about the world that they live in. But what I would argue to you is that I think a lot of ai that are here in the UK, they haven't understood how politics works, how the infrastructure of violence works, how materially the UK is a central node in the way that Muslims all across the world are oppressed on a daily basis. And to somehow disaggregate that and say, well, actually what we need to concentrate on is a nativist British Islam that is protected, that is safe, and that is secure. That is the thing that inhibits us from having a true ummatic vision for ourselves, and to understand that actually all that means is that the burden on us as British Muslims is magnified by our presence here. It is not diminished. It means that if the UK is responsible for dhulm in many sites across the world, it means that the obligation upon us as being based here is magnified by orders of our connection to that violence.
Do you think there's something a little bit more basic? I mean, do you think that some of these imams suffer from cowardice?
Yeah, I mean, it's why I use the word cupidity, but I was trying to use a word that was perhaps a little bit more polite than cowardice. So you just kind of called me out on that one, didn't you? Let me put it this way. I have a fear that we don't teach Tawheed correctly. I have a fear that we talk about la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that we teach our young people that there is no power that is greater than that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then we operate in the world as if somehow we have everything to fear. And look, at Cage, what we try and do is we try to do everything that we possibly can, exhaust every single possible route we can within what is legal in this country. Everything that we can. Like, if this is the box of everything that is legal, we want to do every single thing inside that box to make sure that we have an excuse before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we tried as much as we were capable. And more recently, sometimes where we think there's a strategic value to it, to even maybe break the law. As we saw brother Muazzam Beg, was a former Guantanamo Bay detainee, and brother Muhammad Rabbani also, break the law. And we can talk about the Defend Our Jury's Civil Disobedience Acts in a bit, inshallah.
Yeah.
But at the very minimum, it's interesting to me that our communities all of a sudden become legal experts. I've got people telling me about what they can and can't do, when, I'm sorry to say it, but when it comes to terrorism laws, I am one of the experts in this country, without trying to brag about it. Like, I've spent the last 22 years of my life studying this thing. And what, you're telling me that you know better than I do about the subject that I've specialized in, that I have a PhD in?
Yeah.
And so what is it that makes them say these things? It is this analysis that somehow, they can protect themselves from the state if they just keep quiet. Brother, our masjid can't host the Filton 24 families because what will the charity commission say? Brother, I'm telling you now, there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing that's going to happen to you. If you, follow the due diligence that your masjid is supposed to go through, that you make an assessment, and that the assessment that there's nothing legally wrong with hosting the Filton 24 families. But the charity commission will start investigating us. So what? So what? Is not the protection of life worth it? Worth what? Some paperwork that you have to fill out and that you will succeed in. In the end, you will succeed when you respond to them. But more than that, why are you as a charity that is being regulated by the charity commission not asking the charity commission your own questions about how it doesn't investigate all these Zionist organizations that are constantly fundraising and supporting a genocide? They don't, charities are not even doing the basic minimum of leveraging the position that they have with their own regulator in order to push back against them. I believe that every single Muslim charity in the UK right now that has any kind of involvement with Gaza has to take a position on Zionism, has to take a public position on Zionism, that it is not enough that you raise funds for building infrastructure, because the building of infrastructure in Gaza is a subsidy of the genocide. We subsidize Israel's violence by rebuilding what they destroy. And I'm not saying for a second we shouldn't do it. Absolutely we must. We must put our money together to give the Palestinians every single chance that we can. But we just have to acknowledge, just as a matter of fact, that we're subsidizing what the Zionists do. They do the destroying, we do the rebuilding, and we pat ourselves on the back at the end of it. But brother, what plan do you have to end Zionism, an idea of fascist racism that is able to legally operate in the UK? What is the plan of your charity to end the root cause of why that violence is taking place? Do you have a plan? And, you know, I'm getting to that stage where I really think that as Muslims in the UK, that if our charities who are ostensibly working for the Palestinians don't have an anti-Zionism agenda, then I think that we shouldn't contribute to those charities anymore.
Right.
I think they should publicly, personally, my view is that I think they should publicly declare how they intend to advocate against and have a plan to end Zionist influence in the UK from where they're based, but also in the world. I think it's extremely important. Otherwise, why are we just giving to the zero-sum game? Yes, inshallah, we get to help the Palestinians a little bit, but the machinery of violence that caused all that destruction there is still there. Surely these charities should be acting in relation to it, no?
Can I ask about the Defend Our Juries protests?
Yes.
So there have been, I think, almost 2,000, maybe even 2,000. More than 2,000, right?
I think close to 3,000, if not
Is
even
that
more.
so? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so there have been 3,000, almost 3,000 arrests. And these arrests that have been people showing solidarity with the organization, with the prisoners, as we saw today with Greta Thunberg. Can you talk us through that? Because, you know, the optics look remarkable. You know, most of these people are white, elderly. A lot of them are elderly. Some of them are priests and vicars, and not all Muslims by any stretch of the imagination, from what I can see. These are ordinary, law-abiding citizens who are showing support for Palestine Action, and the police have been commanded to arrest them. Like, just talk to me about why they're doing this and what the impact has been of that Defend Our Juries action.
The Defend Our Juries action is possibly one of the most significant moments in the history of activism in the UK.
Civil disobedience?
It's an act of civil disobedience,
Yeah.
right? So what they decided to do when they saw the prescription of Palestine Action, so about 6 months ago, is to come together and call large groups of people to specifically break the law. Now, so these are Section 12 and Section 13 offenses under the Terrorism Act. We talked about Palestine Action being proscribed as a terrorist organization. Now, an expression of support is a criminal offense. Now, if you speak the words aloud, I support Palestine Action, and I'm saying that, of course, hypothetically,
Yeah.
that is an offense under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. Now, if you write the words, I support Palestine Action, on a placard or a piece of paper and hold that sign up, that is, again, an expression of support, but it is a Section 13 offense, which is a written communication. So what they decided to do, which has a much lower potential sentence, 6 months imprisonment at the very most.
Yeah.
Okay. So what the Defend Our Juries organizing committee decided to do is offer people the opportunity to break Section 13 of the Terrorism Act. They said, we gather together and we sit down and we break the law together by writing, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action. So they're all sitting around, they do this action, hundreds of them at a time. In one case, on one day that we were at in particular, I think it was the day that Brother Mazen Beg was arrested. There was almost 1,000 people in a single day that were arrested.
Yeah.
And of course, this overwhelms the system, and that's the whole purpose of civil disobedience.
Right.
It is to bring the machinery of the state to a grinding halt by making it impossible for them to really prosecute that many people. They are not going to imprison 3,000 people. They can't. It's just impossible because they have to give everyone exactly the same sentence. It's not like they can pick and choose and say, oh, well, we don't like Mazen Beg, kind of senior director at Cage International. We hate him as a person, and so we're going to give him the full 6 months in prison, but we're not going to give it to the 90-year-old grandmother. No, you have to apply the law equally. So now they're left with a conundrum. How do they prosecute all of these cases of people who have actively chosen to break the law? And as Cage, we decided that we were going to put some of our own people forward to do that. Alhamdulillah, because we think that, we're seeing all of these elderly white people getting involved in this action, showing their solidarity to the Palestinian people by willing to break terrorism legislation. We also have to play that role as well, because if we don't, we will always be left behind. We will always be that community that was too scared of its own shadow to take part, to do what is right. And look, I'm not saying this is right for every single person. Okay, not at all. I think it is a difficult thing to do in many ways, which is why mostly we're seeing elderly people do it. But there are many young people doing it as well.
Yeah.
Many young people have chosen to break the law in order to make it clear that what Palestine Action was doing before its prescription was saving lives. And what does it mean to use terrorism laws in order to stop that process from taking place? Because what was Palestine Action really doing? It was doing what? Criminal damage, right? But direct action itself, it's still available. It's still there. Direct action has not been prescribed as a method. And so we hope that, of course, Palestine Action is gone now, right? We cannot support it at the moment as the law stands. Inshallah, we hope that they win their case and that the decision to prescribe them is overturned. But until that point, there could be many other type of direct action groups that emerge that maybe target different weapons manufacturers and different investment companies and firms and whatever else. As I said, we know it works, but we also need now these acts of civil disobedience in order to make clear that actually people are willing to risk their safety and their security for the sake of what? For the sake of sending the message that Palestine is non-negotiable, that we will not allow a genocide to happen on our watch.
The prescription of Palestine Action came under a Labour government.
Yes.
Yvette Cooper was a Home Secretary at the time, but of course it's been carried with great vigour, I think, by the current Home Secretary, a Muslim, Shabana Mahmood, and also, of course, Sadiq Khan is the Mayor of London, and these two, the Home Secretary and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, have joint strategic control over the Metropolitan Police, who are largely the ones responsible for the majority of these arrests. What are we to make of these two individuals, of Muslims generally representing us, and the vigor with which they are, prosecuting, to some degree, or at least condoning the arrests of these large numbers of people on the streets of London for supporting Palestine?
So, we've spoken on a previous episode of the Thinking Muslim podcast about my views on electoral politics and in particular Muslim participation. For me, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
Shabana Mahmood could be a non-Muslim. It doesn't make any difference to me either way. What I look at is policy and how policy impacts upon my community.
Yeah.
And I interact with that directly. I think where it becomes significant is how do you go from being somebody who's publicly an anti-Zionist to somebody who is willing to be involved in ensuring that Palestine Action, an organization that was literally saving Palestinian lives, maintaining its proscription under a really I would say gross use of terrorism legislation. It's utterly disgusting that they would use terrorism legislation to do that. So that's the real question, actually. Like, how do you go from this position to that position? And I think the only way that you can really describe that is through the emphasis that there is on power and the maintenance of power, and how and why Zionism is still such a central node in the extractivist colonial capitalism that exists in the Middle East. There are many, many, many interests at play, many of which stem from the UK. And people like Shabana Mahmoud, people like Sadiq Khan, they play their role in that. And that's why, like, lip service to the Palestinian cause is actually a form of licensed dissent. You can say as much as you want that, you know, we don't like what's happening to the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
But if you are operationally involved in the maintenance of their harm, then you are part of the problem. And so therefore, just by virtue of their Muslimness, it makes no difference to us, ultimately.
Yeah.
It makes no difference to us whatsoever. Like, we don't care whether you're Muslim or not. We care about whether or not you learn how to be a decent human being. And being part of a system and structure that is pro-genocide means that, unfortunately, you fall on the wrong side of history, and probably you fall on the wrong side of your own akhirah.
Earlier on, you said that people like you, Cage, other activists, try to use everything that is legal to make the point about Palestine and to further the cause of you know, our oppressed Muslim Ummah. I mean, you're against electoral politics, but if I may lightly push back and say, well, imagine if Asim Qureshi stood for elections, not as part of a Labour Party, but as an independent candidate. Muazzam Beg stood for elections, Rabbani stood for elections. You know, you have support from, alhamdulillah, have support from within the Muslim community. Mm-hmm. Isn't it the same as saying that, you know, we've got a toolkit of styles available to us? One of them is judicial action, another one is electoral politics. And as long as the right people, and that's part of the problem probably, Sadiq and Shabana are the wrong people.
Yeah.
You know, they're not the type of people who can confront power. They're the type of people who conform to power.
Right.
So why doesn't Asim Qureshi stand for election as part of, I'm not saying even take it very seriously, but just as part of this broad toolkit that's available to you, to use it as a platform to speak what we regard to be just and true?
This is a very, kind of deep question from a number of different perspectives. For a start, I don't think I ever would in my life, and inshallah, I hope I'm not that person.
Yeah.
And not because I don't think you're right, that there is a reason to do so.
Yeah.
So I think we should just be clear about what I'm saying, and I'll speak about myself as opposed to the whole of Cage as an organization, right? Which is that, yes, you use every means at your disposal. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, right? Like, be conscious of Allah as much as you can.
Yeah.
Now the question is, what does that look like? My concern is always about this. Do we get involved in a system and a structure that pacifies us as a people, or do we get involved in a system and structure that is able to leverage positions in order to make an effective change? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm against electoral politics in its entirety.
Yeah.
What it means is that I'm against the idea that change happens predominantly through that means. My analysis of electoral politics over the last, 30 odd years that I've been interested in looking at it, is that largely when people get involved in it, what happens is that they lose their own sense of their ethics and their own sense of dignity as they get further involved in the mainstream political parties.
In the mainstream political parties. I'm saying, Asim Qureshi is our candidate
we'll get to that in a second.
Hamlets.
We'll get to that in a second, right? So let's talk about the mainstream political parties first.
Yeah.
They have a 3-line whip, as you know, right? There's an entire process and a system of structure that does not permit them to break a certain ceiling of their own ethics, right? We know that as a matter of fact, okay? there are many Muslims who are now part of the Labour Party in particular, even some, who call themselves Muslim, as part of the Tory party, actually who call themselves Muslim in either party, right? And who weaponize that Muslimness against the community, or should I say they instrumentalize that Muslimness for a certain purpose, which is we're Muslim, we care, this is our cause when it comes to election season, right? We know that. We see that consistently. We see that happen in mosques. There's no mosque there's no politics in the masjid, brother, until an MP needs to give their pitch for why you should vote for them. And then all of a sudden, politics in the masjid is completely fine. You and I both know that story very, very well. And then, of course, what happens is that they get elected and they become monsters. They become people who all of a sudden have forgotten what their roots are. They've forgotten what the cause is. They've forgotten that Zionism itself is an evil ideology that has to be upended. They forget all of this somehow because they are now within circles of influence that they cannot break free of. Okay, and so there's constantly, we're being told that, you have to wait, you have to wait, you have to wait. I was very critical of Zara Sultana's positions at the beginning of the genocide while she was still inside the Labour Party. On leaving, and I think she's a really great example of this conversation, on leaving, she has found more of a voice. I was extremely pleased, very, very happy to see her outside HMP Bronzefield the other day, using her voice and standing for Qasser, who had collapsed on the floor. And we can talk about Qasser, Zohra and others in a moment. She's one of the hunger strikers. So great. But now we're talking about a different world, right? Which is you are now an independent, or you have a smaller party, one that is unlikely to actually have some degree of influence in terms of electoral politics outside of being an antagonistic voice towards government, which is fine. That's great. But let's not pretend that is how power manifests itself. And that's the issue, right? The issue isn't about getting involved in electoral politics. The issue is how our ethics are presented once we get inside that system. And I think Zara's example is a good one, where she's much more effective outside of Labour than she ever was inside Labour.
The shame was that she stuck with Labour for so long. I mean, that was a travesty.
Right, absolutely, right. And I think a number of people called her out over it. Is she more effective now? I would argue yes, in some ways, in terms of being able to advocate for certain causes, and certain positions. Is she still problematic in other ways? I think that's a continuing conversation, but this isn't really about her. As much as it about, okay, what do we want from somebody who is getting involved in that entire process? And I think, like, inshallah, the independents, they've used their voice at various points, at various times to do a certain thing. But if they're not using their voice to remain connected to the community and what the community is doing, then their voice becomes, ultimately useless. Now, for me right now, quite frankly, not that, I would necessarily promote any politician because, just as being somebody inside cage, like, we have to maintain our independence from anyone and everyone. But I find that Zach Polanski, in some ways, and Mohsin Ali, they're both kind of coming up with narratives that I'm like, oh, okay, that's actually really good. I'm really glad that they're speaking about this and they're saying these things. And actually, I think they've shifted the dial for even the independents to be a little bit more brave. At least that's my assessment, that actually the independents had become a little bit subdued in their public statements and their politics until Polanski and Ali started to really push a public narrative around Palestine and Gaza in particular. And so I think that, I don't, as I said to you before, I actually don't care whether or not my politicians are Muslim. It really doesn't make any difference to me. It doesn't add any value to my life in any shape, form, or manner. What adds value to my life is whether or not I see people who are able to take ethical positions in the public space and shift the dial in relation to what this country looks like, and to actually fight the kind of rise of these fascistic elements that become so embedded in all the mainstream political parties. Right? Labour is a fascistic party, right? And I don't think we should kid ourselves about that. more than likely, we're looking at perhaps a reform government at the next general election.
Yeah.
That needs to be fought. But who's going to be fighting that? Who is going to be embedding fascist narratives and right-wing narratives in order to try and meet that electorate? And who is actually going to be fighting that on the streets? That's what I want to know. So it's not about being against electoral politics.
Yeah.
It's about what those politics represent. And if those politics don't represent an actual ethical framework by which we as a community can say, okay, that person's saying the things that we need them to say in order to actually have a dignified life in the UK, not just one that is subservient constantly, then that is something that we can get behind. But we have to see it, and it has to be practiced, and it has to be maintained. It can't just be something that we're waiting for in some future once that person is in a specific position, only to then let us down when they finally get there, once they become a minister. I'm not interested in that.
Bienvenue sur The Thinking Muslim. C'est un plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa ahlan bik fi barnamij al-Muslim al-Mufakkir. The Thinking Muslim में आपको दोबारा खुशामदीद कहते हैं. मैं आपका आज हमारे साथ होने पर शुक्रगुजार हूँ. I've got some really exciting news for you. My guests and I now speak Urdu, Arabic and French, with the help of AI, of course. We aim to reach a larger audience and hope to dub our archive and new programs into these languages. I need you to subscribe to these channels and help spread the word. If you want to help this project, please consider making a donation or becoming a member. So Asim, you know how much I respect you and respect your positions on all sorts of matters, and respect Cage. And alhamdulillah, you know, I've always said, you know, often on camera, that I think Cage is probably one of our greatest groups in the UK, and we need to preserve and help and fund Cage as much as we can. However, on this issue of electoral politics, I mean, I feel that I just want to go through. I don't usually, you know, come back like this, but
yeah, sure.
As someone who's been involved in a little bit of that over the last year or 2 years, I sometimes fear that you and you know the good brothers at Cage are taking a maximalist position,
and sisters
and sisters in Cage. I don't speak to them, of course. I've taken a maximalist position on electoral politics, whereas you know you take a pragmatic position on using the judiciary and using the court system, which is equally embedded within this system of genocide, right? It's not as if that's somehow independent and can be relied upon, whereas, you know, these are all marred in blood, but you find spaces and you find gaps and you try to utilize those spaces and gaps, right? I think the second point to make is that, you know, the independents have actually been using a voice from day one. You know, I would suggest that Adnan Hussein, for example, or Shaukat, you know, they've been pretty brave in Parliament, and they haven't. What is interesting is, you know, the fear was that these independents will be consumed within the system, and the system will be able to systemize them and bring them within that structure. But actually, no, they've stood outside and they've been quite vocal. I think the difference between Zach Polanski maybe and them is that Zach Polanski automatically has a greater platform than they do. But I think they've been actually very consistent from day one and have been speaking against the genocide. Like just today with Greta Thunberg, you know, at least I've seen one of them make a very strong comment about how, you know, the British government is marred in this sort of system of violence, right? So, you know, but of course, and that's my last point, is to say that, you know, they are, subhanAllah, you know, the four Muslim independents that only one of them has had any real experience of electoral politics in the past. And so they've had to learn and they've had to develop and they've had to grow. I've always thought that if only Asim Qureshi stood in Bethnal Green and Bow or Stratford or Ladywood or Sparkhill, you know, these are constituencies that have almost 40 to 50% Muslims. You know, if we have brave, quality candidates who don't believe in the system in the way in which Shabana and Sadiq does, you know, maybe then we would have brave voices in Parliament. So, you know, I'm sure the comment section is going to be on my side here, I have to say. But I would ask you to reconsider.
Guide us all, inshallah, to what is best, inshallah.
I think in the next election, if we just had Asim on our ballots,
I think you'd be much more suited, I think, to to that kind of thing than me, perhaps. Look, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us different appetites for different things. I'm somebody who wears his ethics very, very strongly on their sleeve.
That's what we need.
And I find it very difficult to play centrist roles in the way that I speak to people and the kind of positions that I take. I'm not very, very good at that type of conversation that I think is very required to be a politician or a diplomat. And I acknowledge that is a particular skill that's required. I personally don't have. And also the reason why my work, inshallah, and I hope as Cage is effective is because of our independence.
Yes.
Because we don't take any money from any government. We don't take any money from grant bodies or whatever else, right? Like our ability to do kalimatul haq is based on the freedom that we have, which is derived from the community's own ethics, because it's the community that supports us.
Yeah.
So that's really central to that process of accountability, and see, that's the thing, right? We don't see the system as being X and only that thing. We see all of this as a constellation.
Yeah.
We understand that there are going to be some people who go into electoral politics, and those who say important things, we will support them. Like I will reshare anything that anyone says that is good.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Like I wouldn't even hesitate about it, because that is something that, okay, they're using that platform in order to promote goodness, right? We should do that.
Yeah.
But then you have to have people also who help to hold the community to account, and to hold our leaders to account, and to hold our institutions to account. And so, of course, what we do is we use every single resource. I was in Parliament literally 2-3 weeks ago with the Prisoners for Palestine group and the families.
Yeah.
It's not a space that I particularly like being, or I'm comfortable being in, because there's a degree of duplicity from the politicians that are meeting with us, right? But you have to, for the sake of those who are oppressed, like, the prisoners that I meet in prison, the ones who are on hunger strike right now, and unfortunately I still haven't had a chance to meet them since they started their hunger strike. They are literally dying for the sake of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And so if what it takes, if I'm being asked by the families, brother, will you come to Parliament with us and sit with us and stand with us while we meet with these politicians? I will never say no to them. These are the people that I owe everything to because of what the risks that they're taking. And so, the pragmatism is in us understanding that we live in a system of violence. The pragmatism is me understanding that, I have to present an expert in a court case, and there's certain types of experts that look and present better than other type of experts, even though they have the same qualifications. These are pragmatic decisions that we have to make inside a system of violence.
Yes.
But what we don't say ever, and I hope that inshallah will never be the type of people say that, it's okay that we're getting along, that we're making do. While we might use that system at times to achieve certain ends, we're not happy until justice is established on this earth.
Of course, yeah.
In its completeness. And just because, our kids are becoming doctors and dentists and lawyers, it doesn't mean the system is working.
Yeah.
It just means the system is working for some. And we're not interested until the system is working for all, until we have a living wage that every single person is able to benefit from, until we have a fully functioning NHS, until we don't have a system of extreme discriminatory policies towards those who are most marginalized within society, until all of these things either are given or all the bad policies end, it's not enough.
Yeah.
And so, we all work within that system of violence.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we use the resources that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us for maximum effect? For us, we see that inshallah, Cage is for the skills that we've been given in particular is the best route to achieve that end. And inshallah, if we have people who are advocating for a certain brand of politics that we can get behind, we will always support those voices, inshallah, in whatever way we can. And of course, hold them to account where we have to.
Yeah.
You know, if they step out of line.
You know, while you were speaking there, I thought that sounded like a great maiden speech.
You're not going to let this go,
So
are you?
let's
You're
move
not
on.
going to let this go.
Let's move on. So I should have actually asked you about the Filter 24
Yeah,
earlier,
let's talk about
because
them.
of course, you know, I think that's it. It's a pain that we all feel. Just bring us up to speed on the Filter 24 prisoners. Why are they in prison? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about them, and what's their current condition.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair. So a year and a half ago, a group of actionists who were part of, at the time, a legal organization called Palestine Action that we've been speaking about this whole conversation.
Yeah.
They, a group of them broke into a weapons factory, Elbit Systems weapons factory, and they entered it. They managed to get inside, and they managed to destroy a number of drones and quadcopters that were at that site in particular. And they had, some of them had GoPro cameras, and they were able to record a lot of the documentation of the various parts and other companies that are all part of maintaining. It's a very important aspect to direct action, which is to understand how other companies work with groups like Elbit Systems. So they broke in. There was some security guards there. One of them was ex-military who decided to confront them. It seems, so far from what we've seen in the trial, that the security guard got quite violent and quite confrontational with them. Even from what it seems, choking one of the actionists quite badly, to the extent they had extensive bruising afterwards. The police were called, of course, and a group were arrested on site. That first group is currently undergoing trial, so it's a live case as we speak. So we have to just be a bit careful about how we speak about it. But so far the trial has been, it's been quite interesting. There's a website called Real Media. They've been doing weekly summaries of every single day of the trial. Very long summaries, but they're brilliant to read. And I highly recommend everybody goes onto the Real Media website and checks them out. You should, of course, already be following Prisoners for Palestine, their Instagram page, and Free the Filter 24, their Instagram page as well. That's where you're going to get all of the information that you need about these prisoners in particular. A group of very young people. You know, right now on trial, you've got Charlotte Head, Lottie, Zoe Rogers, Fatima, Zainab, Jordan Devlin, and now my brain has, I'll remember the others, inshallah, but there's a group of them, I think 6, who are currently facing trial. They will, Sam Corner, they will present their case not as a defense, a legal defense. They have to present their cases by taking the stand and talking about the story of Palestine. Now, this was a tactic that when Palestine Action was still around, that Palestine Action used regularly, which is, here you have a group of people being prosecuted for criminal damage, and the Filton 24 case is a criminal damage case as well. And when they get before a jury, what they do is that they use their platform on the stand to tell the jury, this is the story of Palestine. This is a story of Balfour, the Balfour Declaration, the British involvement with it, all the way up until the present moment. This is a story of genocide. They tell the stories of Palestinians who have been suffering through the genocide and lost their lives. They've been told the story of Hind Rajab, many other stories. And in the vast majority of the cases, somewhere between 80 to 90% of cases, where, of course, they have damaged property, the juries are just everyday British people. They're listening to the stories and they're saying, you're not guilty of a crime. It's amazing. It's amazing. If there is hope in this country, in our belief that actually many British people, there is a common sense of decency that British people have, it's actually in seeing the verdicts that juries are delivering through these cases. Because we're obviously fed a diet of like Daily Mail views of what British people believe in and what they are about and whatever else.
Yeah.
But actually, so many of those same people, when they're confronted with the stories of Palestine, they listen to these actionists and they're like, we have to acquit. We can't convict these people. Look at what the Zionists are doing. And it's been amazing. It's just one of the reasons why the British government wants to take jury trials away.
Yeah. David Lammy is Justice Secretary.
Justice Secretary, the Injustice Secretary,
Yeah.
wants to take jury trials away from us because he wants to put the idea of what law and order is in the hands of a select few judges who are, of course, appointed to their positions and who have career progression and who want to make sure they get to the highest stages of the courts. So they become politically invested in maintaining the status quo, whereas juries don't have that.
Yeah.
Juries are able to listen and hear. And of course, the whole idea of the 12-man jury comes from the Islamic practice of the Lafif in North Africa. They took it over to Florence, and Florence it traveled to France, and from France it travels to the UK. I think it's Joseph Makdisi, or one of those scholars who actually wrote an amazing paper on how that practice of 12 people from your area who are your peers being able to judge. I mean, in North Africa, it was to do with land disputes, but how that becomes embedded in the British justice system is really, really interesting. And, so just this idea of regular people hearing these stories and saying, we want to acquit. And so right now, the prosecution already presented its case over the first 3 weeks. The next few weeks is just going to be the defense. There's going to be each one of the activists telling their stories. And it's so beautiful to read what they have to say and to witness what these young people have to say. Some of them as young as 20 years old. Literally just standing up in court and saying it was love, not hate, that drew them to take action for the Palestinian people. Zoe Rogers, my wife and I, we go and visit Zoe, and inshallah we're going this Sunday to go and see her again. She was the last person to give evidence in her trial. Zoe is like 5 feet tall, maybe maximum, and she's this skinny. She speaks like this. And if I don't know if you've ever been to a prison visit before, but it's usually a very large room. There's so many conversations taking place between loved ones. There's just like this cacophony of noise. And Zoe speaks so quietly, just very, very gently, that you have to really lean in to hear what she has to say. Yeah. But she has so much courage. Not for a second does she even think that what she did was wrong.
Yeah.
Or that what she did wasn't a price worth paying. And we have to remind ourselves that with the Fulton 24 case, they've decided to do something new, which is something that they brought over from America, where they prosecute you for criminal damage, but the judge can arbitrarily at sentencing decide to enhance your sentence through the claim that there's a terrorism element. So that isn't even part of the trial. There's not even terrorism charge. Yeah. At the end, after the case is over, they use a terrorism enhancer in the US and material support cases for years. So something that might be 2-3 years in prison ends up being 30-40 years in prison. Somebody like Sheikh Ali Tamimi receiving, 150 odd plus years in prison because of, at sentencing, this terrorism enhancer being applied to increase your sentence. Yeah. So they're trying to do the same thing with the Fulton 24, where if they are convicted, the judge will then decide whether or not he believes that there is a terrorism element, and then will increase their sentence. So they may spend the next 14 years in prison based on what they've done. Yeah. And I'm telling you now, I meet them on a regular basis. They don't flinch. They don't even think about it in terms of that this wasn't a price for them that was worth paying. Because they say the same thing, and especially the Muslims amongst them, they say the same thing. We got to save a Palestinian life by stopping the weapon. Subhanallah, it's really, really, really difficult to explain to your audience, Brother Jalal, about how when you come out of these prison visits, you're going there to try and comfort them and to show your support to them, and you always walk out feeling like somehow they've comforted you in some way. It's really the most remarkable thing. And to say that I love them, dearly love these young people, as I would my own children, or as my my peers in this space, I couldn't even really adequately describe to you what that love looks like, because you have to meet them yourself to understand how amazing they are as a group, and how I think inadequate I always feel meeting them, because their bravery is something that I haven't experienced in my life, at least anyway, that I haven't seen since the 90s, where friends of mine would go and fight in places like Bosnia and Chechnya, Afghanistan, and really put their own lives on the line. Like, I haven't seen that type of bravery within our community until now.
So can I pick up on that in terms of our community, at least ostensibly, or the Muslim community, right? We're talking about, I feel that we don't really talk too much about the Filton 24 prisoners. I haven't heard a single khutbah or a single mention of them in a masjid in Britain. And it seems like, and I've never had a conversation actually, except, in circles like this with people who are concerned even about the Filton 24 prisoners. And maybe just an adage to that, I feel that many of the activists for Palestine seem to be sisters or women rather than men. And a lot of our young men who are religiously inclined, and so you would imagine they believe in an understanding of Islam that you earlier talked about, are not particularly active on Palestine. And you go to the Islamic societies at universities, and it's like being in a church or a temple when you visit the prayer rooms, because there is an absence of justice, an absence of anything which, in a secular sense, would look like it's something that's external to the prayer room, right? So what's going on there? Why is it that our community isn't particularly exercised by this grave injustice for a cause that we would say, at least in part, is our cause, right? It is really a cause of the Muslim Ummah. But also, why is there an absence of men, and young men in particular, when it comes to Palestine? Maybe I'm being unfair, but yeah.
No, I think you're right. And I'm in a lot of these protest spaces, activist spaces, and it is predominantly women who, our sisters that you see on a regular basis. There are, of course, a number of Muslim men who turn up as well. Allah bless them for doing so. You see a number of families coming together for the large demonstrations. And the large demonstrations are great as an indication to the Palestinian people that we are turning up in large numbers for them. Okay, I think that is the purpose for them. I'm not a fan of the organizations that are part of the committee that put the national marches and national demonstrations together. I think their politics are often extremely weak,
risk averse,
very tepid and risk averse.
Yeah,
I think that they took a very, very long time to even acknowledge what Palestine Action was going through before its prescription. The fact that they had almost zero commentary about the prescription of Palestine Action until the very end. The fact that they took a very long time to even acknowledge that the Filton 24 were facing trial and even involving themselves in supporting the hunger strikers. Like, these are all indications. And if that is something that we've seen across the Muslim community with many of our spaces. Like, why is it taking so long for our organizations to understand that these people are deserving of our support? Let's say we come back to even your imam friend who was complaining about the criminal damage element of what the Filton 24 did. Right? Even though Elbit Systems is literally killing Muslims. But for him, the private property is more sacred than human life. Okay? Sorry. I'm trying not to be as judgmental as I normally am, but it's very difficult because I think these things just really grate on me in particular. And we try to be more forgiving and understanding of where people are coming from, for sure.
No, you don't have to be. It's okay.
It's, I want to be though. I just find it very difficult when I have to meet these people.
Yes.
And when I have to work with Palestinians and their suffering is immediate in my life, and the prisoners and their families, their suffering is immediate in my life, it's very difficult for me then to equate everyday normal Muslim problems with than the things that I have to deal with in my daily life.
Yeah.
Right. Like, my wife always has to remind me that, if my mum's complaining about Auntie Bushra, right, as kind of a generic auntie name,
Yes.
that my mother's problems are real and that I should take them seriously. And this is the problem with being an activist, right? Sometimes you get so involved in your world, you kind of have this sliding scale of what you consider important.
Yeah.
But these things are important. And I have so many questions about our community and the way that it interacts with these things. I remember speaking to the head of one ISOC, who wasn't getting involved in the student encampments.
Yeah.
I won't mention which ISOC or who the brother was, but I remember speaking to him and he said, we've got a really great relationship with the university. They are about to grant us a women's sisters area for the very first time in the university's history. And so what we don't want to do is get involved in activity that holds the university to account, because we're worried that will impact our ability for the sisters to have their own prayer area.
Yeah.
And I said to him, brother, the solution is very simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the entire earth a musalla for us. We're like the first nation, I believe, that were ever granted this privilege of praying anywhere we like. All of you brothers, you only have to do one thing. You go outside and pray and give the sisters your prayer room. There's nothing complicated about it. Really nothing. Just pray outside. Pray in the street. Pray on the grass. Pray anywhere. And give the sisters your prayer room. It is really not that difficult. If that's what you're worried about, then the solution is very simple, which is, organize your prayer in a different way or take slots in the same prayer area. But there is stuff that you can do. But this idea that somehow that these material benefits that we think we're going to receive are somehow more important than the student movement developing. And that was at a time period, by the way, where Hinds Hall at Columbia was at its full, kind of in its full stretch.
Yeah.
The student movement across the world was actually making massive gains. People were being, really politicized in their understanding of what was happening. So many different groups were coming out. They were all collaborating with one another. It felt like a real moment. And then we had our students in the UK and some of the organizations that claim to represent our Muslim students taking a step backwards and saying, well, actually, this isn't for us. And when you get down to the nub of why it's not for them, it is purely about the violence of the state and their concern that the state's violence is not worth the price of getting involved in these endeavors. And so now that's not a question of ethics, that's a question of it's not a question of, it's a question of how you understand your role as a student, how you understand your role as a Muslim in this world, right? So you understand that the ethical issue is there, that you have to defend Palestinians. But what you're saying is that actually, my role as a student is not to get involved in any of these things. That if my university is investing in Zionist organizations and in Zionist infrastructure, that actually that has nothing to do with me whatsoever. But how did you come to that conclusion that had nothing to do with you? Like, your tuition fees are directly maintaining Zionism's status in the world, and you don't think that has anything to do with you. And that's why when I talk about spiritual lobotomy, that's what I mean. That how could you not think? It should be the exact opposite, that we should be constantly asking ourselves the question, how am I complicit? How am I burdened by the positions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put me in and that I occupy? Why are we not asking that question? And I think that's where our community is at, where it is always asking itself, how can I performatively show that I'm doing something without having to take any risks? Because they know they have to do something, right? That's why the national marches are so easy. That's why I get embarrassed a little bit by the overemphasis on having an ulama block at the national demonstrations, because I'm like, okay, brothers, I'm really glad that you came, but is this the extent of your politics, of your political imagination? Is this the extent of your ummatic concern, that you managed to gather yourselves together in a block of people as ulama? I'm really happy that you're here. I really am. And it made me smile to see that. But For many of them, it took convincing to bring them there in the first place, let alone asking them to talk about the Filton 24 and about our brothers and sisters who might die from being on a hunger strike because in their heads, they're like, all we can do now to raise the Palestinian issue is literally allow our body to cannibalize itself so that the Palestinians know that we are still doing everything we can, including allowing our bodies to disintegrate for the sake of raising awareness for them. That's why their demands, the demands of the hunger strikers that are on hunger strike right now, are not just simply give us our rights. What is the last demand on the hunger strike list of 5 demands? It's shut Elbit systems down. And they are not stopping until their demands are met. And you ask yourself the question about 50 days, over 50 days, these, like Gessa Zohra, she's 20 years old. She was 19 when she was in prison. She's so funny. She's so funny. I can't even describe to you how funny this young woman is. SubhanAllah. Allah bless her and protect her. She just makes me laugh from the moment like we enter into that, prison hall, into that visitation hall, into the moment that we leave. But her commitment to her deen, her commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, commitment to the Palestinian people, I would say is amongst the highest that I've seen anywhere in the world.
And our young men?
You mean from the community?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know what to say other than to blame our leadership. I think our young men are a product of the kind of leadership that we've produced. Our young men are a product of the fact that they are learning their religion from YouTubers who have never been on the barricades. When we were, you're slightly older than me, but you'll remember a time when we were growing up where the people we looked up to were mujahideen. They were people that, who really sacrificed for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
And, I think we learn a lot about what Tawheed means from that generation. This generation is learning its religion from all manner of sources that have never really risked anything for the sake of this religion. Who are making mistakes in public ways and then apologizing for those mistakes as they kind of like muddle their way through being, in an online space. And of course, our institutions, rather than holding them to account, say, well, they've got huge platforms, we should platform them as well because the youth listen to them. But, who are we producing? What kind of quality people are we producing that are willing to get involved in the way that, these young people, like the Filton, at least the Muslims, I respect and admire all the Filton 24, but if this is a Thinking Muslim podcast, let's talk about, and it's a largely Muslim audience, let's talk about the Muslims amongst them. Maybe the fact that they weren't involved in those spaces is the reasons why they were able to take action, why they were able to maintain their ethics towards the Palestinian people. Maybe it's the reason why they actually have some degree of bravery about them, some courage.
Yeah.
You listen to Zahra Farouk, who's not one of the hunger strikers, but she's one of the Filton 24. You listen to her recitation of Surah Baqarah. And here is a sister, subhanAllah, like aced her GCSEs, aced her A-levels, aced her degree, like just an absolute monumental intellect. And she's sitting in prison. And her recitation of the Quran, when she kind of recites it down the phone and we get to listen to it and benefit from it, you know that she understands the verses of the Quran that she's reading. You know that she's internalized it and that she is maintaining the honor and the integrity of this ummah through the positions that she's taken and continues to take on a daily basis. You read her articles and her concern isn't about what's happening to her. Her concern is about what's happening to this ummah. And she's writing from inside prison in a way that, I wish half of our young people were writing about. But we're in this attention economy where we have to have clickbait titles. We have to create drama within the community. And we have to be discussing like things that have really nothing to do with the fact that we're living through a genocide.
What does, there are some Dawah brothers who are having gender wars. Why does a genocide taking place? Like, how do we How do we understand that? Asim?
You know, I keep on talking about us living in systems of violence. And the gender wars are a product of that system of violence.
To pacify us?
I don't know about pacifying. I think it's just easy. I think it's easy to create an attention economy over issues that people are of course concerned about. But, you know, we don't have any way of dealing with, you know, ultimately. Like, you know, you've got this entire narrative around, say, for example, you know, how feminism as an ideology has destroyed the family life and whatever else. Brothers, like, you know, from a materialist perspective, we have not provided anything by means of any kind of environment in which the Muslim family life can actually truly exist in this country. We live in atomized spaces in where parents take care of their own children. The whole idea of like a Hawali structure, a Riyadh structure, where you have multiple people involved in the direct raising of children is completely gone. We do not have Bayt al-Mal that will take care of those who are impoverished, of divorced women. And so you got this kind of whole thing, right? Where it's like, it's exactly like the whole terrorism argument. You take one thing and you blame it on ideology, but have no consideration for the material conditions that creates the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
And so you focus on like, you know, women as being the root cause of the problem of why the family is breaking down, but without having any analysis, any materialist analysis at all whatsoever of what we have produced as a community to maintain the integrity and structure of our community so that every single person knows that they are supported within that structure. Because we would rather funnel money towards projects that have absolutely no value to us whatsoever and actually build something that is sustainable. Bruce Perry, he's got the book on childhood trauma called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And it's a series of anecdotes about throughout his career as a psychologist dealing with childhood trauma. But it's the conclusion to his book that's really fascinating. He says that a child is supposed to be raised directly between 40 to 100 people. Directly raised. And so we don't want to create a system and a structure where we're actually taking care of our children in a meaningful way. We're getting involved in the lives not only of our children, but on our nephews and nieces, of our neighbors' children. Like we want to atomize ourselves and live like that kind of lifestyle where everything is 100% halal, brother. But have you built the community in the way that it needs to be built in order to then say, yeah, we did everything that we can? So that's why, for me, like, you know, the gender war is a complete, you know, it's a garbage war. It's got nothing to do with actually building anything. I think the attacks on a lot of our sisters in particular who raise concerns about the kinds of forms of oppression that they face on a daily basis, I think they are, in some ways, I would just say that they're actually just, bottom line, they're just gross. I think it completely devoid of any kind of analysis, of any real analytical work. It's a focus on ideology, because that's easy. It's easy to punch down on people and say, oh, it's because you've got a sickness in your mentality. But what have we built? What have we built? Have we built a structure that you can actually say that is actually the case? Or have we built unhealthy relationships inside liberalism, where we say that this thing here is the perfection of what the Sharia is, and regardless of what the consequences are for the human beings that are involved in it, regardless of what happens, you know, you just divorce somebody, leave them to the mercy of the state, a state that doesn't see them as human beings in the first place, a state that will deprive you of every single benefit that it can as much as it possibly can. And then you want to say that actually, well, the problem is you know, the woman at the end of it. What if we created alternative structures where actually everybody knew that they could be taken care of?
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, and that's a side point, but I think it just fits in this whole idea of like, who are we and what are we doing and how do we interact within a society that is unjust at so many manifold levels. And of course, the reason why this conversation is about Gaza is because there's a genocide taking place.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the mass killing of human life. both Muslim, Christian, and otherwise, but it is just mass killing. We haven't even touched on Sudan, where there's mass killing taking place, sponsored by an Emirati state that calls itself a Muslim state. But at best, it could be described as a Muslim majority country, at best. But really, what is it? It's a kha'in state. It's a betrayer state, which is killing our people in Gaza, in Sudan, and across the world, which is weaponizing people like Tommy Robinson against our community in the UK. What are we doing about that? And if we're holidaying to Dubai and going there on invited lectures and whatever else, what does that say about who we are and how we connect to our ummah and how we connect to what is important? Because if that is the case, then again, we have problems. Allahu Alam. But, I think that these are questions that are more fundamental about who we are.
Dr. Asim Qureshi, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time and attention to today's subject. And we all make prayer for the Philton 24. And can you just mention those websites again that we should be...
Yeah, so the two Instagram pages for sure are Prisoners for Palestine and Free the Philton 24. Those are the two main pages. You'll get all your information. Of course, and follow Cage International's work as much as you can, inshallah.
Inshallah ta'ala. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair and keep us in your du'as.